As much as Donkey Kong was a key player in the early success of Nintendo, they've always been a little odd in their treatment of the character. Following Rare's triumphant overhaul of the Donkey Kong series and their subsequent buyout at the hands of Microsoft in 2002, it seems Nintendo has had little to no idea what to do with the character. This, in fact, was an issue long before Rare entered the picture. While the original Donkey Kong arcade game may have been Nintendo's first major victory in the video game industry, the attention they gave to the titular primate post-launch pales in comparison to his arcade contemporaries. You see, there was never really a Donkey Kong craze in the same way Pac-Mania swept the nation around the same time. Sure, the game was popular, but there was seemingly no great push from Nintendo to achieve similar notoriety. While Pac-Man received nearly 9 iterations and spin-offs in a 37-month span, the Donkey Kong series, in the 37 months from its release, received 4. Game count aside, merchandisers seemed far more trigger-happy to slap Pac-Man onto anything and everything imaginable than they did this big hulking monkey. Part of me wonders if this reluctance to commercialize the Donkey Kong character has anything to do with the role he assumes in 2 of the 4 aforementioned games. In the original Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong 3, DK is the villain, a large, nearly static sprite at the top of the screen. Pac-Man had the luxury of being a playable protagonist right from the start. Donkey Kong had to wait 13 years to be a playable character in anything other than a couple throwaway Game & Watch games. In Donkey Kong Jr. and Junior Math, his role is reduced even further, as instead of being the game's main antagonist, he is quite literally made into set dressing. The same fate that befell Pauline in the original Donkey Kong. Before we continue, I should probably give a brief synopsis of the first Donkey Kong game. You know, so I can pad the video out. In Donkey Kong, you assume the role of a carpenter named Jumpman, or Mario, or Little Mario. Who really knows what his name is? As Mario, you must attempt to save a character lovingly referred to as Lady. She wasn't named Pauline at this point, from a large ape named Donkey Kong. Beginning to notice a pattern here? Donkey Kong, for whatever reason, has kidnapped Pauline and taken her to the tops of various unfinished construction sites across the city, with a quick stop at the cement factory for Stage 2. As Mario ascends these structures, Donkey Kong will attack you with barrels and springs. In the later levels, Donkey Kong doesn't attack you at all, although touching him will still cause you to lose a life. Along the way, Mario will have to jump over enemies and obstacles, as well as use the strategically placed ladders for cover and traversal of the stage. In a shocking twist, Mario can lose a life to fall damage if he doesn't take care in where he will land. If Mario can jump over 2 obstacles consecutively, he'll gain additional points. He's also able to defeat enemies and obstacles using hammers found on most stages, although the use of a hammer is limited and will prevent you from using ladders. There's one more way to gain points, and that's by collecting Pauline's lost belongings, also scattered across most stages. The 4th stage of the game shakes things up a little, as Donkey Kong stands atop a structure of girders, held together by rivets. Walking over each rivet removes them from the structure, and when none are left, the structure collapses, sending Donkey Kong tumbling. With the big ape immobilized, Mario swoops in to save Pauline and wins back his love interest. In the Japanese version, the game will loop after the 4 stages are completed. However, the US version requires you to complete a larger number of stages before a loop. The game becomes more difficult with each loop. That sounds like a solid foundation for a video game empire, right? What's so tragic about this? Well, the squeaky clean and always confident image Nintendo tries to keep is about to get a lot muddier. The original Donkey Kong arcade game was not programmed by Nintendo. Yes, Nintendo employees are responsible for the design and concept of the game, but the actual underlying code that allows the game to function outsourced to a company called Ikegami Shusenki. This was common practice at the time, as many of the companies big enough to even consider the production and marketing of arcade games did not have anyone in-house capable of programming. You need to remember that companies like Sega and Nintendo did not emerge from the womb developing video games. Sega produced mainly electromechanical games and slot machines, and Nintendo seemingly produced whatever the hell they wanted. How can you expect a Japanese toy company in the late 70s to have any computer programmers on their payroll? A company like Atari, founded with the intent of producing video games, had the upper hand in terms of in-house development. But now that Nintendo had really made it off the ground in the arcade scene, they would finally be able to develop a game of their own, without working with an outside hire, their next big step, and in 1982 they released Donkey Kong Jr. Donkey Kong Jr. is very similar to its predecessor. This time around, you'll step into the non-existent shoes of Donkey Kong's son, who attempts to rescue his father from Mario. Sometime between the first game and Jr., Mario had trapped Donkey Kong inside a cage, wielding a whip to keep the beast at bay. The completely urban setting of the first game is ditched, and the first two levels take place in what appears to be a jungle with cliffs, vines, and even water at the bottom of the first stage. Stages 3 and 4 take place inside Mario's hideout, where the vines are exchanged for metal chains and the inviting greenery from the first two stages are gone. A larger emphasis is put on climbing in this game, meaning Junior can easily navigate the series of vines before him, and can even climb two at once, giving you a considerable speed boost, although the unwelcome fall damage from the first game returns. Items like springs and keys are new. Various fruits which, when knocked down, will increase your score, replace Pauline's many belongings from the first game, and the enemies have more varied attack patterns, making them tougher to avoid overall. When a fruit you've knocked down hits an enemy, the enemy will be defeated. The fourth stage this time around, much like the first game, plays a little differently. Junior must climb up chains, pushing keys into the keyholes of his father's cage. Once all the locks are undone, a family reunion is underway. Like its predecessor, the game loops after the 4 stages are completed, becoming harder each loop. Nintendo's first attempt at game development would not pass so smoothly, as in a cruel twist of irony, the code that Donkey Kong Jr. runs on was developed by reverse engineering code from the original Donkey Kong, code of which Nintendo's ownership was legally dubious, due to no one at the time really being sure how copyright law would apply to computer code. There are unused graphics in Donkey Kong Jr. that are pixel for pixel leftovers from the original Donkey Kong, including a sprite of the Ikegami Shusenki logo, which was hidden unused in the original Donkey Kong. Ikegami Shusenki sued Nintendo in 1983, and a settlement was reached in 1989, the terms of which have never been disclosed. Now, what was going on in the US around this time? Oh, only another legal battle. Universal City Studios took Nintendo to court in late 1983, alleging that Nintendo's Donkey Kong had infringed upon their rights to the plot and character of King Kong. This whole legal battle turned out horribly for Universal, as it turned out they possessed no ownership of King Kong. King Kong was in the public domain, something they should have looked into before, suing another company. So what has Nintendo learned thus far? 1. They own the rights to Donkey Kong as a character. 2. The next Donkey Kong game they develop should, for safety's sake, not seem too similar to the first two, to not complicate the ongoing case with Ikegami Shusenki. Donkey Kong 3 made its way into arcades in 1983, moving away from the platforming formula of the previous titles, and becoming a single-screen vertical shooter, much like Galaga. In Donkey Kong 3, you play as Stanley the Bugman, which coincidentally was my nickname in college. Stanley, gardener extraordinaire and cousin of Mario and Luigi, has to take on the Herculean task of defending a greenhouse from Donkey Kong, who has invaded the garden along with a host of villainous bugs and worms, for some reason. You achieve this by spraying Donkey Kong with enough of your bug spray to send him to the top of the screen, causing a beehive to fall on his head. Be careful though, if you spend all your time going after Donkey Kong, the various insects attempting to kill you and or steal your plants are bound to get you. Your score at the end of each round is determined by how many plants you are able to keep at the bottom of your screen. Stanley possesses limited movement on 3 planes and can easily hop up and down one layer at a time. Stanley's bug spray can also be upgraded if he is able to knock the power-up down from one of Donkey Kong's vines. Donkey Kong 3 received a pseudo-sequel/port developed and published by Hudson Soft called Donkey Kong 3 Daigakushu. I definitely did not pronounce that right. Which was released on multiple Japanese home computers. In this version, the multi-tier design of the arcade's levels are gone, meaning Stanley can only occupy the ground. The game no longer takes place inside a greenhouse and has been expanded with 20 levels to play. Bonus stages were also added. They appear every 5 stages. You may or may not be shocked to learn Donkey Kong 3 bombed in the States, partly due to the video game crash of 1983, which, while mostly affecting home video game consoles, did take a bite out of arcade profits as well. What probably contributed the most to the game's failure was the fact that it was hardly a Donkey Kong game. You could replace the game's character with pretty much anything and it would make more sense than what we got. Also, it was 1983, nearing 84. People were getting tired of vertical shooters, especially ones that played in such a limiting environment. What was Nintendo to do? Every Donkey Kong game up to this point presented some kind of problem. Would this significant simian be retiring anytime soon? Nintendo had a plan brewing. While they had ventured into the world of home video game consoles prior with their TV game line, it was apparent to them that if they could find some way to sell adaptations of their arcade hits, they would be swimming in cash. The family computer was birthed from this need and was designed first and foremost to play a perfect game of Donkey Kong. Although the Famicom launched with 3 games, Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye, the port of Donkey Kong to the console was the catalyst for everything. Alright, so the Famicom is out in Japan and people are loving it, right? One problem. In the eyes of some parents, children aren't allowed to have fun. They're supposed to learn. How exactly do you appeal to this uptight segment of the market? You produce cheap educational games using assets from the 3 launch titles you developed. And all of a sudden, Donkey Kong's teaching music, Junior's teaching math, and Popeye's teaching English, ironically. Yes, although the Donkey Kong music game was cancelled, those other 2 actually came out, and they're about as fun as you can imagine them being. Allow me to demonstrate with a grueling explanation of Donkey Kong Jr. math. Donkey Kong Jr. Math has 3 modes. In the first mode, Calculate A, Jr. is presented with a number by his father, and he must get to that number by keying in multiple equations. An assortment of random numbers from 1 to 9 and 4 binary operators line the screen. For example, if the number was 32, Jr. would climb over an 8, then make his way over to the multiplication symbol, and then over to a 4. When a number is collected, after a small amount of time, a new random number will take its place. Pressing the B button will clear the board of what you've input. Calculate B is much of the same, but gives DK the ability to generate negative numbers. Both Calculate A and B modes can be played by 1 or 2 players, but there's no way to select either. Even when you're playing solo, the second player's character will lie idle opposite to you at the start of the game. Try as you may, there's no way to get that pink fellow off the screen. Exercise mode, which appears to take place inside Mario's hideout, is a single-player affair. This mode starts Junior off on a screen with a random selection of math problem types. Junior can select which type of math problem he wants to solve by reaching out and touching it. This will take him to a screen where a math problem is given with key elements missing. The position of the bird on screen indicates what square Junior can currently enter a number into, and when you climb onto the chain below that bird, you can select which number based on your position on that chain. Once you feel like you've entered everything correctly, you must go to the chain with a key and push said key into the keyhole. Doing so will reveal whether you were correct or not. Attempting to solve the problem without entering anything into the squares will solve the problem for you. The game ends after 10 problems are completed. Not only was this a poor move for the Famicom itself, it was an especially poor move for the Donkey Kong series, for two major reasons. The first being that no sane person would fall for this, right? Donkey Kong Jr. Math is actually one of the rarest NES black box games over in the States, due to low sales numbers. But the most important is that we've introduced yet another problem into the Donkey Kong series: game cancellation. I've been back and forth on whether to include the following games in this video, but I know that if I don't, there will never be another worthwhile opportunity to talk about them. Nintendo's Game & Watch line, a series of simple handheld LCD games released from 1980 to 1991, received 6 Donkey Kong titles, and I'll be covering them in the order in which they were released. Donkey Kong is much like the arcade game it is adapted from. Once again, Mario must avoid the barrels Donkey Kong sends his way and make his way to the top of the construction site. The same plot from the arcade version is present here, although due to level backgrounds on Game & Watch games being physical items, only one level is present here, an interpretation of the first level of the arcade game. Donkey Kong Jr. is less like its arcade counterpart, taking place on a much truncated version of the first level, with a key and lock added to the stage. Collecting the key and using it on the lock will free Donkey Kong, moving on to a faster version of the level. Donkey Kong 2, the only game to ever have that title, also stars Junior, and he, once again, must rescue his father. While the Game & Watch version of Junior was mostly based on the first level of the arcade game, Donkey Kong 2 takes elements from the third and fourth levels. This and the previously mentioned Donkey Kong adaptation are part of the multi-screen series of Game & Watch units. Donkey Kong used the second screen less impressively. Donkey Kong 2 treats the two screens as two different levels in a way, with the bottom being most similar to the third stage of the arcade game and the top being similar to the fourth. When all 4 chains on Donkey Kong are unlocked, you've saved your father. Whoopee. Donkey Kong 3 is, surprisingly enough, nothing like the arcade version. DK and Stanley are both present, as are the bugs, but the game is most similar to Pong, this being a title in the Microversus system Game & Watch line, a 2-player series. Both players wield a can of bug spray similar to Stanley's from the arcade game, and use the spray to send bugs toward the opponent's side of the screen. If a bug makes it through, the other player will gain a point. You will, however, need to be wary of the amount of spray you've used, as the amount of shots you can keep at you at any time is limited. When you run out, you'll need to move to the side of the screen to gain additional shots. The amount of time you stay on the sidelines determines how many shots the refill will give you. Refilling leaves you wide open to any bugs coming your way, so be careful. In Donkey Kong Circus, you play as the primate himself, Donkey Kong, as you attempt to juggle pineapples while balancing on a barrel at the command of Mario, who sits to the side, watching. Dropping a pineapple will result in a miss. While you play, fireballs will seek you out, emerging from oil drums at the top of the screen. If touched, they will stun Donkey Kong and result in a miss. If Donkey Kong gets 3 misses, the game is over. The final Donkey Kong Game & Watch is Donkey Kong Hockey, another Micro vs. Series game. This is another Pong-like game, but without the ammo mechanic featured in Donkey Kong 3. The two playable characters, Donkey Kong and Mario, have engaged in a hockey match for who knows what reason. The first player to reach 10 points wins. Remember how I said game cancellations would be a problem for the Donkey Kong series going forward? I've already mentioned Donkey Kong no Ongaku Asobi, the game that was supposed to teach children music somehow. But if you look at a timeline of Donkey Kong releases, you'll notice a large gap between 1983 and 1994. Where was our beloved monkey during this period? He was in the gutter getting shafted by Nintendo every chance they got. An unsubstantiated rumor from the 13th issue of the UK gaming magazine, Mean Machines, states that a Donkey Kong 4 was test marketed in select arcades in 1984, but that it failed to generate much excitement, leading to its cancellation. Now, do I think this is actually true? No. For one, this is the only place this has ever been mentioned, and it's in an issue of the magazine from 1991, which leaves a lot of time for certain facts to be misremembered and put into print. I would like for this to be real. The idea of some long-lost entry in the Donkey Kong series from so long ago really does pique my interest, but knowing the links Nintendo fans go to document any information about their games, cancelled and released, the fact this is the only mention of this game, to many's knowledge, is telling. Another game, Return of Donkey Kong, was mentioned in a few official Nintendo publications around 1987-88. Interestingly, it seems like Donkey Kong would have been a playable character in this game, and that you'd be able to throw barrels. No screenshots or gameplay of this game have ever surfaced, with these few mentions in print being all we have. Did you know that Yoshi's Island may have started out as a Donkey Kong game? Or at least a game featuring him? Early prototypes of Yoshi's Island leaked in 2020 under the name Super Donkey. These most likely date to around 1991 or 92. So these are yet again another example of Donkey Kong getting the short end of the stick. See what I mean now? Nintendo did not give us all that they could with these Donkey Kong follow-ups. The character deserved better, and it's clear that the Donkey Kong series could have been successful going forward if they had just put in enough effort. The 10-year gap between Donkey Kong Hockey and 1994's Donkey Kong for Game Boy must have been awfully confusing to any first-generation Nintendo fans. It's obvious that all the man-hours that could have gone into Donkey Kong were being put into propelling Nintendo's new everyman, Mario, into the limelight. A decision which, despite making this whole video, I have to say without a doubt, was the right move. And I'm glad that they did so. I am a bigger fan of the Mario series than I am the Donkey Kong series. And who knows, without the Mario games, maybe Nintendo would have faded into obscurity along with all the games they made. I just think it's interesting how the character that gave Nintendo's breakout hit its title could have been so mismanaged and mistreated.